Hey everybody, and this is Krissa. This is Bad at Keeping Secrets. I have Michelle Drouin here to talk about her book, Out of Touch. Michelle is a psychology professor. She's a researcher. She's a forensic consultant. She's an expert witness. She's a speaker on all issues related to technology, relationships, couples, sexuality, and out of touch, how to survive an intimacy famine, which I feel like I'm in right now. So I invited her to talk about the book, about her research, about how technology is affecting our relationships, our development. And I kind of wanted to start off with a question for you, Michelle, about you talk a little bit about your childhood or your non-traditional childhood in the book. Things I'm always fascinated with is the one's exposure to different areas as a child and how that sort of translates into adulthood. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of your experience growing up.
So different areas geographically, different areas emotionally.
You could do both, but let's do geographically and emotionally. Let's do both.
Well, geographically, actually, I was a little bit limited. I don't have a lot of memories from the tent living days, which is a scene that I recount in the book. My mom and dad were hippies, so they had quite a wayward lifestyle and were very much vagabonds for much of my younger years, until my mom suddenly realized that living in a tent in Colorado, my little sister and I could be eaten by bears. And so she suddenly got really concerned, and we moved back to Illinois and then ultimately to Indiana. For much of my childhood, we lived in Indiana. We moved a lot just because my life was pretty tumultuous. So in terms of my experiences and the things I saw, I would say the geography really wasn't the diversity. It was more differences in family structure. We lived in poverty, so just adapting to how it is to live in poverty and to look out onto the lives of other individuals who weren't affected by the things that we were. That would probably be the diverse experience that led most to really the person I am today, but also a little bit in the book, because the consistent theme for me, despite all the changes in our lives, was love. My mom was my consistent parenting figure, and she was very, very good at loving us and showing us how to love.
So how did you sort of translate these experiences of poverty and love into wanting to research it and write about it and ultimately teach as well?
I think that I've always been fascinated by humans in general. I think, when your life is stripped down to the very basics, what is really important becomes very obvious. So when we had very little and all we had was each other, you become really hyper-focused on the people in your life. So for me, I think the poverty just really attenuated my focus to the people who were in my world. So that was a natural connection. And then studying it came pretty naturally as well. I actually started my graduate school career thinking that I wanted to work with children and their development. That was also a passion of mine. And then quickly, when I became a professor, my focus shifted to how texting was influencing our human connection. At the time that I was in graduate school, it was actually just a perfect storm. I was living in England, and texting had really caught on in the UK in a way that it hadn't yet in the United States. And I could see how it changed just social interactions in general. And so I feel like I was just in the right place at the right time. I started studying texting and how it was influencing relationships. And then pretty soon I turned to sexting and how it was influencing relationship. And once I got into that area, I became, I guess, more broadly interested in how humans were being affected by just this influx of technology that happened really as I was beginning my academic career. So a lot of it was just really being at the right place at the right time and having a general interest in relationships and how humans connect with one another.
There are several points that I want to ask you about in what you just talked about, but you alluded to that you had noticed how texting was changing relationships. I'm going to ask you the same question about sexting, but could you talk a little bit about your observations that kind of that you noticed with the onset of texting?
Yeah, when I started looking at texting, I thought, what a unique way for people to actually have 24/7 connections and brief interactions that keep them connected throughout the day. Whereas I always felt like they lacked a little bit of the intimacy of the phone calls of my youth. So I think some of the people who are probably watching this podcast would agree that the long phone calls that they had in their teenage years were pretty formative, the going out with your friends and connecting with them. And I think texting immediately appealed to me as a medium that was actually just very different than that, that was going to change the way humans connect. And indeed, I think it really has. The pervasiveness of sexting has really changed, I think, the entire landscape of social communication.
Let's talk then about, so from what I get from that is basically you're foregoing these sort of longer, deeper phone and in-person conversations for these sort of short blips of connection that sort of have kind of replaced these sort of longer phone calls. But then you also, that sort of transitioned into the research you had done on sexting. As someone who has never sexted,
yeah, that's amazing. I need to do a case study. Really.
I'm wondering if you could just first like define it, and then also sort of what I think you talk a little bit about, that most people don't want to do it or the dangers of it in the book. But if you could kind of start with the beginning of what it is and how it sort of evolved from texting.
Yeah, so I mean, sex really drives the internet. So the evolution from texting to sexting, I thought was going to be immediate, and it was. So I started researching it pretty early in my career because I knew how sex really did drive the internet. So sexting would be, in the broadest definition possible, the transmission of sexual material, whether it be words, images, videos, live sex sessions that are conducted over, some kind of messaging app or like any kind of live application that I guess is shared between one or more partners. It's usually not done alone. And it
Right.
yeah, so I mean, that would be the
think about doing it alone.
Yeah, I mean, some people may do it alone. It's actually something I'm starting to explore. One of my research assistants came to me and said, I've heard about this erotic selfie being sent among friends as a way of like self-empowerment. Like you send it around and say, I just, I took this erotic photo of myself, and it isn't actually meant for a romantic partner. And so, we're going to embark upon a study that examines, are people actually just taking these photos of themselves to evaluate or think about their sexuality in a different way than they had before, to see their body depicted in a way that they think is artistic. So anyway, that's a complete aside. So yeah, so the basics of sexting would be anything that is sent that's sexually explicit at all. And a lot of people define it in different ways. Some people look at only at nude or nearly nude selfies and include that as sexting, but my net has always been quite broad.
I think it's not that I'm opposed to sexting. I should say I'm generationally, we didn't have smartphones at the time I was single. But I'm curious, so when you say you've done some research about it, like what have you found in terms of how that's sort of augmenting or expanding dating and intimacy?
One of my friends and colleagues who does research in this work, Dr. Jeff Temple, I saw him quoted, and he said, sexting has become the new first base. So I don't even know if it's augmenting, it's rather just become integrated, I think, in sexual communication. So when people are starting a relationship or maintaining a relationship, I think sexting has woven a consistent thread through many of the relationships that exist, and especially those that are reliant upon social technologies in order to keep them connected. So particularly people who are have partners at a distance. I know sexting can be a really valuable way for them to keep in touch with one another, but even in the initial stages of, I guess, a romantic, any initial stages of any kind of romantic endeavor, sometimes sexting comes up as something that's either desired or that's something that people just offer to do in order to establish some initial physical intimacy with a partner. So it's interesting because I too am from a different generation. I feel like I didn't get my first cell phone until I think I was almost 30. However, there are sexting studies done with married couples, and about 10 to 15% of them also sex. So it's not only young adults who are sexting or teenagers that are sexting, adults are also doing it within their relationships as well.
Can you talk, there's some studies you had done about sort of, I guess there are two directions I want to take this in, and I want to do both of them. But the first one is how there was that movie, Always Be My Maybe, or how Facebook in committed relationships, how there's this sort of always another option, or keeping your options open. And I was wondering if you could talk, again, I was really surprised to learn that Facebook existed. Like there are lots of sort of ways that we keep connected to other romantic possibilities, but still be loyal to our partners.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is really interesting is because these social networks have opened up connections to everyone in the world at the touch of your fingertips, they've also changed the way that we view mating. So, it used to be that our mating options were limited to those who are in our immediate geographic environment, or those with whom we shared contact details like a landline phone number. But now it's not so. You have contact or potential contact with anyone who you can find on the internet. You can look them up and find their phone number. You can find their email. You can find their social media contact page. You can add them as a contact, and then you can start messaging them. So it's increased accessibility, and therefore increased the mating pool significantly. And that has both pros and cons.
Can you talk about what those pros and cons are sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to, I didn't want to jump ahead. So yeah, I mean, one of the pros is that it really does allow you to find people who are really like you, especially if you have very niche desires or the wants in a partner. It opens your world to be able to find those people, and they don't have to live in your hometown or down the street from you. They can live countries away, thousands of miles away, and you can still develop that romantic attachment. So I think that's one of the big pros. You're not limited in your pool. One of the big cons is that you're not limited in your pool. So you have the option of so many people, which brings about a cascade of problems. You have to find the needle in the haystack. You might be bombarded with options. And when you're bombarded with options, you might make worse decisions because of just the cognitive load that's associated with having so many options. It's really hard to make a decision when you have so many people to choose from. Not only that, when you have so many people to choose from, it's hard to then make that commitment to stay with a partner, knowing that out the door, there's more. There's always, that's someone else's quote. I think, I can't remember, but I remember hearing that quote by someone else, and I thought it's such a perfect quote. Out the door, that there's so many other people who are just waiting in the wings. So it may also give you the mind of, there are plenty of fish in the sea. I do not have to stick with this one decision. And that, I think, really represents the tenuous nature of relationships that exist right now, when people just know that there's so many options. I think it's actually mirrored really nicely in the job market right now. It used to be when I was growing up that people got a job at the steel mill and then they stayed there for 30 to 40 years. Now, when millennials are job hunting, they're switching jobs every 1 or 2 years, and they know, and it's so easily accessible. They know how to get it, and they know where to go to get it, and they can advertise themselves on this global market and really ask for what they want and negotiate themselves into positions that fit them better for the time of their life. Same thing with partners. They can also, every year as they change, every couple of years as they change, they can negotiate themselves into a partnership that fits them better at that time of their life. So yeah, the options, I think, are both a big positive and negative of the internet in terms of really settling down and choosing one thing for the rest of your life.
So I know that you can't speak to this in terms of like, I think, do you have an opinion on sort of how relationships have become disposable with sort of the options or the paradox of having expansive choices?
I think we have a lot of research that's really been focused on the search and just that cognitive load of the search, and how these relationships are harder to actually find because people get so overwhelmed with the search. What I will also say is that there's a big cognitive load with online dating in general. Think of how many decisions you have to make when you are dating online. How many people are you going to talk to at once? How quickly do you meet up with them in person? Once you meet up with them in person, how quickly do you decide whether to take things to the next level? If you're dating one person who you met online, who else might you be dating? When do you end that relationship if it doesn't feel good? There's so many decisions involved with the dating process that I think the entire thing is really, really overwhelming for a large number of individuals, which is why you see people kind of dip in and dip out again. They're dipping in and out again into that online dating pool, because I think it does get overwhelming to a lot of people. And you meet people who may not be representing themselves online in a way that accurately depicts who they are face to face, which I think would be true of almost everyone. So I think that the disposable nature of this relationship actually happens even at the very beginning parts of finding partners, because you just have it in your mind that I have no idea if this is going to work. In my book, I talk about ways to kind of circumvent some of these issues. I think that people spend a lot of time talking online when they really need to get in a face-to-face environment, or at least, like a live video chat. I think a lot of our attraction to other human beings is based on how they move in this world. And if you spend all this time talking online, you are not seeing so many of the nonverbals and so many of the ways that the person moves through their different spaces. So I think a really good way to circumvent this issue is to get into that person's life in as many different environments as they will let you into as soon as you can, because who they are online, it may be completely different than who they are when they go out with you on a date, or when they're with their family members, or when they're with their friends. So seeing people in all those different environments can give you more information about who that person really is.
Anecdotally, I was really fascinated when OkCupid came out, and I matched with this person who I like instantly fell in love with, and then was too scared to meet up with. And they sent me this like nasty note because I like stood them up. And then years later, they came to a talk I was giving to, and I knew it was them because we had a friend who, or I have a friend who dated this person as well, and I was instantly repulsed. But our personalities algorithmically had lined up to a T. And I think like, I really feel like yielding that advice of like, there is something attractive about the way humans move in the world that isn't transferable via technology.
It really isn't. I mean, it's really not. It's funny because now that we're getting into the metaverse, I wonder if some of those qualities will actually translate into the metaverse, if it will give us a better sense of who people are. But yeah, I mean, even the way a person walks, I've been reading lately, you might have too, about the ick factor, and these little things that really turn you off about a person. And I mean, they seem so little, they're so little, but they can really affect attraction. So the way someone walks, the way they move their hands when they talk, the way they look at you when you're having a conversation, or don't look at you when you're having a conversation, all of those nonverbal cues can really give you a sense of that compatibility. And you feeling repulsed, I mean, you probably felt that right away. Did you feel it?
Instantaneous?
And how much time had you spent talking to that person before you met up?
A ton of time. And also a lot of it was like talking about like cognitive loads. I was fantasizing like this person in my mind, their writing style was just like so lovely and fit so perfectly my like sort of ideal idea of what a romantic relationship would be. And I mean, it was shocking the sort of the binary, the difference between this like extreme attraction and this extreme, like, this is not right.
That's not right. It meshes though. It meshes with what I've been saying for a long time. It's easy to fall in love with someone's words. There was a really great study that came out just a couple of years ago, and they wanted to see what predicted long-term relationships, the duration of them based on initial meetings for online daters. And one of the things they found was that a misalignment in their attraction. So if they were not attracted to them, physically attracted, that predicted the long-term relationship. Additionally, their communication style and specifically their word choice face to face was something that a lot of people were really let down about. And that also predicted the long-term course of that relationship. So it's not only the way someone looks, the way someone communicates online can be super different than the way they communicate face to face. Because think about it, online you have the benefit of time. You have so much time to craft like a perfect message. Whereas face to face, it's way more off the cuff. It's way more spontaneous. And someone could be totally different. And combine that with maybe misrepresentations or, people depict themselves in the best light online. And I am 100% for that. I mean, put your best foot forward. What they found though, is when there was a big mismatch between expectations and reality with regard to the way someone looked or the way someone communicated, that led to someone kind of not trusting that individual, feeling like that person had been insincere in some way. And that also predicted the length of that relationship. So for a lot of reasons, I'm sure that was really shocking for you because you thought, oh, here's this compatibility. But what works on paper and what works in a 2D environment does not necessarily work once you meet up face to face. So, pushing it forward to face might seem like a big time investment. I need to get ready. I need to go and actually meet someone somewhere. But in the long term, it might be saving you so much time because you have all that opportunity cost that you're missing out on by focusing your efforts on that person when it really would be the best thing for both of you to go in different directions.
Absolutely. I feel like I first came in contact with this theory through Aziz Ansari's Modern Romance when that came out. And then again, more recently with Seth Stevens Davidovit's book, Don't Trust Your Gut. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I know Stephen Davidovitz, yeah.
Oh, I find him fascinating. But anyway, yeah, he has lots of really amazing dating advice in the book. Not that we're having this discussion about dating advice, but it's very fascinating. I kind of want to talk a little bit about how you talk in the book about how sex is out and cell phones are in. I actually was reading that when my psychiatrist also said the exact same thing verbatim when I was complaining about a lack of sex.
Wow. I'm so happy to hear we were on the same page and didn't even know it.
Okay. Yeah, it was a coincidence that, I take a lot of delight and hope in coincidences.
So do I. Yeah, this is the thing. I think what we have to give ourselves a break. I hope something that's portrayed in my book very strongly is that none of us have any malintent as we're moving through this world and trying to adapt to this technology. As humans, we're incredibly adaptable. That is one of our best traits as humans. And cell phones came along and they offered a convenient solution to a lot of woes. I grew up in the era of encyclopedias. Encyclopedias are not user-friendly. They're not fun. They're not super engaging. I liked them when I was 8, but they didn't have the answers to everything. Now our cell phones are not only an information hub, they are such powerful computers to help us find the answers to almost everything. And critically, they're a lifeline to everyone we love and care about. Anyone who I love right now, I can reach via my cell phone. And my children are old enough where they both have cell phones. And it used to be that my children didn't have them, but they were right here. And even if they weren't right here, I could use my cell phone to call their school and I could have access to them within minutes. So we have this natural draw to this very adaptive tool, and that is great. Humans have been adapting for centuries. This is one of the ways we've adapted. Unfortunately, what that means is that when we are attending to our phones, we are not attending to potentially the other humans in our environment. So we're making this trade-off between, this technology that we seem to be really engrossed in and what might be sitting in front of us. So cell phones are definitely in. And I think sex, we've seen declining trends in sex. Millennials are having less sex than millennials have in our parents' generation, or yeah, probably my parents' generation. And this decline in sex has been attributable to many things. People being more focused on work, fewer people in relationships. It might not appear obvious to many people who are in a relationship, but actually you do have more sex while you're in a relationship than when you're single.
That was shocking to me.
Yeah, despite what you hear about singles and all the fun they're having. But if you think about it just in terms of accessibility, even if you're having sex, once every 2 weeks or once every month, if you're single, that kind of statistic would be pretty high, having sex with a different person once every 2 weeks or once every month. So there are a lot of different reasons, but I think many of them can go back to cell phones. Many of those reasons, the fact that we're delaying marriage, the fact that relationships, we have more divorces, we have people who are maybe not getting into a serious relationships, which is one of the things that I focused on in my book. Sometimes I think people's relationships aren't even getting to the stage where they want to be intimate, and therefore sex is going down. And then in a long-term couple, we have this 24/7 society that's making constant demands on us. So when we go to bed at night, it's so much easier to turn and just start scrolling on your phone, where you then have access to all the information. And I always say it's like the People magazine of your friends. Like if you scroll through social media, you get, these beautiful highlights of your friends' lives. It's a way to keep in touch with your social connections. And we have very social brains with very minimal effort. You do a like here, a love here, a little comment here, and you're like, done. I made all of these social connections that fuel me and fuel them. It's a lot easier to do that than to actually get up the physical exertion to, okay, I'm going to have sex with my partner. So yeah, I think it's a trend that a lot of people identify with, for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about sort of what's the brain chemistry of what's going on, the differences between getting up and having sex with one's partner and scrolling your friend's People magazine?
Yes. So let's talk about the main two things involved. So oxytocin versus dopamine. So we have this dopamine feedback loop in our brain, things that are novel, things that feel good, give us little shots of dopamine. And over time, as things become less novel, that dopamine burst that we get is just a little less. And so when we're going through and scrolling through these feeds, we might get little bursts of dopamine just by the little reinforcements, the likes that we get on our own post, or even maybe just seeing new things and being exposed to something novel. But from sex, we might get a flood of oxytocin. We can get this from, hugs as well, but definitely from sex, you get it. And this flood of oxytocin actually has a positive effect on the relationship for not only the duration of sex, but for a couple of days after. So you have basically this afterglow that helps couples bond. So I think that when people make this trade-off, they don't really think about the long-term effects on their biochemistry or the way it might affect their relationship. It's really easy to get those immediate gains, that immediate burst, that immediate satisfaction, and you may not be thinking of the long-term effect on the bonding within your relationship. So from a neurochemistry perspective, from a biological perspective, both are rewarding, but in different ways and in ways that often result in a trade-off.
I want to ask you if you have an opinion on sort of the ideal frequency a couple should be having sex, and then also about the sort of, you mentioned a little bit hugs and the sort of rewards. I believe that you talk about the 20-second hug.
The 20-second hug. Yeah. The 20-second hug is the amount of time that it takes for your body to kind of register and for you to get that nice release of of hormones and neurotransmitters that feel good. They also, I mean, it even works with your dog. Even hugging your dog can lower cortisol levels, I think, and your heart rate. It's been a while since I've looked at that study, but it just in general relaxes you. And I always think about it not only about me, but also for my dog. When I give my dog a hug, I think this is having a positive effect on me. But if I hold him for 20 seconds, it's probably also having a really strong effect on his biology and what's happening to his body. So hugs, we know for sure. For sex. So what was, I got you into hugs. So what was your question about sex again?
Well, I think that there's a graph in the book, and I can't remember exactly where it was, about talking about different maintaining intimacy, sort of the frequency that is
Yes,
the
the frequency. So yeah, I mean, there is, so this is up for debate. So the
totally.
people have done studies where they have tried to artificially inflate the frequency of sex to see if it makes a couple happier. And they took people who are having sex on average once a month, I think, or once every 3 weeks. And they said, we want you to increase your frequency. And actually that study was not great. It backfired in a lot of ways. People weren't happy that they were being told what to do, I think was the ultimate conclusion made by the study authors. And it didn't actually make them any happier to have more sex. So it's easy for me to say, oh, once every couple of days or every day, that would be great for you biologically. However, when we actually try to change relationships and make people have sex, it doesn't actually work out that more sex equals more happiness. Now, I do think that there could be a study done that shows that. It just hasn't been done yet. So the people who were in that study that I just talked about were pretty happy, and they were having sex with a pretty good frequency. If we took people who were actually not as happy in their relationship, and maybe where one or both partners thought that they wanted to increase their sex, then maybe they wouldn't have reacted so negatively to like being on a forced schedule. And in my book, I talk about it in relation to donuts. I love donuts. I always use them as examples in my classes, but like, I love donuts. Let's say I eat 2 donuts a week, and that's perfectly fine with me. That's exactly how many donuts I want a week. If someone told me you need to double that, I need to have 2 donuts or 4 donuts a week, I'd be like, wait, why are you telling me what to do? And me, when I'm shoving down those 2 donuts, they may not be as enjoyable as the ones that I actually wanted because I had a craving for it. So there's this artificiality that's inputted when you try to do these experiments that I think is really hard to overcome, really, to have positive results. I've been married for 25 years. I don't know about you. How long are you in a partnership?
12 years.
Okay. And are you?
Years. Sorry.
You've been, okay, so 13 years.
Wow.
So I think my perspective on this now is different than it was 28 years ago when I met my partner. I think at that time we had sex as a part of like fun, getting to know each other, intimacy building. And I think so sex in early stages of relationship can serve a lot of different functions. As time has gone on, sex has taken on a different meaning for me because I really feel sex is really good for the body. I think that, when we have an orgasm, especially, and when we connect physically with anyone in ways that make us feel close, it's from a biochemistry standpoint, a very positive thing. So now sex for me is not only something that's fun and not only something that's, part of exploring, although we've probably done all the exploring we could do in 28 years. More than that, it's something that I see as a healthy habit for a couple. So I think what the ideal amount of sex is what the couple feels is a good amount for them. And for some couples, it's going to be once a week or once every couple of weeks. And as people get older, sex usually declines. So that number might change during the course of your relationship. As you get older, you might have more health problems that affect how pleasurable sex is for you. But I do also think that when you get in the habit of sex, it can become, to me, I think of it as like a habit, like flossing your teeth, just something that you should do for the health of your relationship. And that then can be a negotiation between a couple because it'll be different for everyone.
So I'm going to try to ask a few more questions because we're running out of time. But I wanted to talk a little bit when you were speaking about hugging for 20 seconds. This made me think about sort of the predictions of AI love and affairs, and how you could potentially hold your phone for 20 seconds and receive that sort of same oxytocin bump. I was wondering, like, if I think about Westworld or Her or different movies, how close is our sort of, I don't know, do you think that we'll be satiated for sort of connection and belonging with AI?
In the future, yes. Right now, no. I don't think it's where it needs to be, but those are the same references I make when I think about where we're going to be in 20, 30 years. I can't even predict it. I'm not a computer scientist, so I don't know when we're going to have this Westworld reality. But if they actually realize the anthropomorphism that they are envisioning for robotics, and the human form they expect these robots to take, then absolutely. Why would it feel any different to be hugged by a robot than it would be by a human if it's a physical sensation? Will people develop feelings for robots? That is the only question that I have. And I mean, I began my book with a talk about when I was in Hong Kong with the robot Sophia, and the entire goal of that project was to see whether or not a person could develop feelings for a robot, a very sophisticated robot that's been, on the talk shows and on, late night shows. Sophia is the first robot citizen. So, I mean, but even in her very advanced form, Sophia is still very new, right? And not sophisticated, I think, enough for a human to really bond in the ways that we bond with other humans, just because that spontaneity isn't there yet based on the AI programming. Do I see this in the future? Absolutely. If these ideas about robots are realized, then I think that people will develop connections with robots.
I mean, I think, and maybe this is overly generous of me to think that there are already connections forming. Like I can't deny I don't have a relationship with Siri. And the way that I treat her depends on my mood. And
oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Well, I noticed, I think this was like 10 years ago when I first got her, or when she first came into my life, I noticed sometimes when I would be frustrated driving and she would not give me the correct directions and I was late, I would yell at her. And now over the years, I think I read an article once that it showed someone's true nature, how they treat their technology. And I was like, shit, I gotta start treating Siri with a little bit more respect.
Yeah.
And so ever since then, I feel like this sort of relationship, and even like relationship implies two entities. But like you said earlier, when you were talking a little bit about the sort of sexy selfie, is that
yeah.
Like, relationship is also, I mean, I feel like it can be inclusive. It already feels like it is inclusive with my understanding of Siri. And it doesn't necessarily, I don't have access really to other people's understanding of me and sort of their understanding of the situations and interactions, just like I don't have access to Siri in some ways. I don't know.
It's interesting because when you were talking earlier about that date that you had from OkCupid, you talked about filling in the gaps. And that is another thing that humans are really good at. We like closure. So when we have anything in our world that is nebulous, we just fill in the gaps with our own desires, experiences, hopes. And what you did on that OkCupid date is a really natural and adaptive thing to do. You filled in the blanks with what you wanted it to be. Well, then you're probably doing the same thing here with Siri, right? You're attributing who she is and the way she interacts towards you. You're basing those assumptions on your own experiences. So yeah, in a lot of ways, I think people will be doing that with AI. I just think right now, AI has limitations. If we get to the point where it's something like Her, for anyone who hasn't watched, it's a super fascinating movie with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson as the voice of an AI assistant. So like think of a uber advanced Siri. And Scarlett Johansson is just fantastic in that. I mean, who wouldn't want to communicate with Scarlett Johansson and her? Everyone would be intrigued. She can write music. She can have all these conversations at once. And critically, and I think this is a really cool part of her and the way they envisioned it, Scarlett Johansson could be there 100% of the time. Scarlett Johansson had no limits, no other obligations. She was just 100% there for Joaquin Phoenix. And so that is super appealing about AI. And I just think we're not there yet, but absolutely, I think it's possible to get there. You know, these machine learning algorithms, the more data you put in, the more they learn. And I see that as just boundless potential in how these AI bots are going to be able to adapt to us and really start to understand and mimic us in ways that make them better than the average conversation partner. Because really, Carissa, and like for everyone's listening, when is the last time where you had a conversation with someone, you're like, I was blown away. That was amazing. Like that person, oh my gosh. So these AI bots might surpass humans in their ability to connect and the knowledge that they bring, because the really fascinating conversations that I have are like the one I'm having with you. You're referencing books that you've read, authors that you like, experiences that you've had. And not every conversation is like that for the average human.
I think, okay, so I was going to ask you something else, but I'm going to ask you a little bit of the last sort of newsletter post that we did was about boring people and my desire.
Oh, really? Perfect.
My sort of intense desire. Like, what does it mean to be a boring person, and what do you do with that boredom once you start feeling it? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, because my theory has always been that boring people, it's actually the responsibility of the person who is bored to find an entry point in the conversation or some sort of common ground to connect on. But I'm realizing as I get older, more and more people, I feel like, oh, they're like, oh, this person is boring, I'm just going to leave or avoid them. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your philosophy on boring people and if they exist and what they are.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting when I'm with people who don't give me much in a conversation, I flip into investigator mode because nothing is ever boring to me. I'm a scientist, so every single person that I meet is a data point. So, I mean, that makes it all sound very disconnected or shallow, but it's not. Like an incredibly fascinating data point. So to me, there is no boring person. I just want to get to know every single person possible. That said, I do understand life has limitations in terms of time. So one of the phrases that I really like that I heard a couple of years ago and I've been using since, and I did use in the book as well, is social economizing. So using your social resources where they're most needed. So if you are not the kind of person who is endlessly fascinated by every person that you meet because you're just going to keep asking them questions, then the best thing for you to do is kind of move on. People don't need to click. What you think is boring may be someone else's fascinating. What you think is boring might be someone else's perfect person to talk to. We don't all need to be connected in that way. So I think boring is obviously a very personal experience, but also what you do with boring people is 100% your choice. You can either make that the best you can if you're kind of stuck in that situation, or you can move on for the better of both of you, because maybe that person who you consider boring is going to move on and have a really great conversation with someone else. So anyway, life is really short. One thing, you know, I'm nearing 50, so I feel like time has become so much more ticking in my mind in terms of this length of life we have. And so I really am in the stage of life where I think we need to make intentional decisions about the way we spend our time, and understand that something that's not perfect for me could be absolutely perfect for someone else. And so my breaking away from situations or people that don't serve me in that moment is good for both of us and ultimately, you know, the world.
It's sort of also like a huge weight off one's shoulders, that again, going back to the sort of emotional labor that it is to be inquisitive. And sometimes you just might not feel curious in that moment, which again, to sort of let go of judgment on sort of whatever's going on with you in that moment. It's just, it feels comforting to be able to like frame it in that way. So thanks, Michelle, for doing that. I wanted to kind of talk about, so bookend the conversation a little bit in terms of time. When we started the conversation, you said that you had sort of, your first sort of interest was in childhood development. And I was wondering if you could kind of, if we could couple that with technology and how you feel like technology is sort of changing and shifting our ideas of belonging and intimacy growing up.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that I say in almost every talk I give is that one of our primary motivations as a human is a need to belong, a need to feel loved right after food, water, feeling safe, like you have a roof over your head. The very next thing, according to Abraham Maslow, that we need is to feel loved or to feel like we belong. And I really, really believe in that concept. Everything else, like the need for self-esteem, the need for, you know, aesthetic harmony, the need to fulfill myself and become self-actualized, those are higher levels once you feel like you've accomplished or you have some kind of foundation in these lower levels. So from the very beginning, when we're young, I think the feeling of being loved really anchors us in our existence. And I am, I guess, a little bit lamenting the trends that I see around me where we have become so engrossed in the 24/7 grind of our worlds that some of these really important moments in human development are slipping by. And I think there was an image I used to show in my development classes, and it was of a child pulling on a parent's pant leg, and the parent said, "I don't have time," and they were reading a book on how to raise a child. And I thought it's now so passe because now they'd be on their phone looking at the best ways to help, best ways to raise a child while that child is sitting there pulling on the pant leg. And there have been lots of research studies done on parents in a park and how often they look at their phone and how they feel about it, and how children make bids for attention, and then how those kids react when those bids are not responded to. There are studies done in restaurants. There have been studies done. One of my collaborators, Brandon McDaniel, has done studies on technoference. So how often technology is interfering in the everyday interactions that family members have with one another. And I just think it's good to bookend it with this as well. We need to give ourselves a break. Like these technologies emerged before we really knew what effects they would have on us, and they're incredibly attractive, incredibly addictive. So us being addicted to them and our children being addicted to them, I think it's a super normal thing. And we are adapting to what kind of society has created for us as our social structure. But I think we also have to now be really aware. Children are spending more time on technology as a teenager than they sleep. On average, they spend 7 hours a day of leisure time using technology, 7 hours a day. And that's not even time spent on homework or in school. And when you think about those numbers, you think, when are they getting that face-to-face time with family members? When are they sitting down and like having a hug or a face-to-face conversation about something that's meaningful to them? One of the things that I'm trying to be fluid about is this idea that as humans, we are adaptable. So maybe the courage that I needed when I approached my husband in a dining hall in 1993, maybe that isn't something that's critical to the survival of humans. Maybe them being able to ask via text, "Hey, will you go out with me?" is just as valuable to the continuation of our species or to human happiness. But I'm watching carefully because I know that it's having an effect. I just don't know how that effect will permeate our world as we move into the future. So
I think it's really frightening. And I think maybe I'm less fluid than you are when I think about how our species has to come together and our sort of lack of knowledge on actually the sort of qualitative things that bind us to each other. And kind of going back to what you were talking about the sort of small hits of dopamine on Facebook and sort of the immediacy, when we're faced with these sort of like large world-ending problems, it is so easy to tap in and escape when really it does take the work. I'm talking about climate change, I guess, in this moment of like,
Yeah.
how do we rally together around something when we could just sit on our phones? And I'm not saying,
Yeah.
oh, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say the only thing encouraging about that is the other thing that I saw, if you think about, the whole GameStop and Robinhood, how people kind of they rallied into some kind of movement online. So I think humans do crave an affiliation with one another. Do feel like people want to rally behind a cause. I mean, I do think too, when things happen around the world, that wave of support that happens on social media, people do, I think, have a natural tendency to rally around a cause. And I think what we need to do is transition from that wave being a social media only wave to that actually reverberating into real life action and getting people to kind of move beyond their screens and do something in real life for the things they believe in. So I think that more than ever, I see these tides shifting where people are really coming together for things they believe in. But it's just, I think, again, moving it into action. It's almost the same thing as what you were saying about, laying in bed and being able to scroll versus, rolling over and trying to have sex with your partner, like it's just, yeah, it takes like that extra actionable step.
Something I want to say really briefly is I really respect how you weigh, or you have a certain neutrality when talking about these topics that I think is really real. And often, again, we really want as humans closure and things to be easily explained when reality is nebulous, or it's all over the place, and there's no possible way for us to actually have any solid answers, which is also sort of frightening. I wanted to talk about also old age and connection, and technology, and how sort of the trends you see in the lack of touch as we grow old.
Yeah, it's not only the lack of touch. So people 45 and older are among the loneliest in our population. So you're not even have to be that old. I'm already in the old category. So I think 1/3 of people over the age of 45 consider themselves lonely. The other thing that happens is our social networks become a little bit less diverse as we get older. And the diversity of our social network actually serves a protective function for us. So one of the great screens that some people employ with elderly individuals is asking them, how many of these people from these different categories have you seen this week? Like family members, neighbors, friends. And it can actually be a predictor of their long-term health and mortality to just that diversity of their social network. So that is one thing, as we get older, we get a little bit more socially isolated. I have a piece in there about my grandmother who at the end of her life, she was blind. She was divorced and she had very few social connections. She lived in a nursing home where she watched almost everyone around her either leave or die. The average person works in the nursing home for, I think, about 2 years. And that's pretty much the lifespan of a person who lives in a nursing home. My grandmother was a long-term resident of a nursing home. She had a lot of physical ailments that affected the way she moved, and she was blind, but her heart was really healthy. So she stayed alive where the people around her died. And I thought a lot about how her world became increasingly small and dark. And she tried to make the most of the social situations that were given to her. So she attended all the group activities. She went every day down to the room and she had breakfast. She would go and listen to someone read to her. But it was an incredibly, I think, isolating experience. I think we really need to acknowledge that as we get older, this is critical to our health and mortality, to maintain people around us. And part of that is touch. That touch that you get from individuals does serve a protective function. Have you been hugged today is a question that was asked by Sheldon Cohen and his colleagues when they were trying to see whether or not being hugged moderated the relationship between experiencing tension and then getting an illness. And they found that it did, a big portion of it. So, being hugged actually helped lessen the tension that one felt in someone's life. And it contributed to whether or not people ultimately got sick in this really cool experiment they did in this hotel. So I feel like people underestimate the loneliness of people as they age. And one of the things that makes me sad, I know there's a book that ends this way. There's an old man and he's dying, and he turns to his wife and he says, "Is that it?" And I just think, what a sad ending. It should be a beautiful celebration of a life well lived. And in our current culture, I think so many elderly people die virtually alone because of the way our current structures are. So it's something that I think really needs attended to. And maybe I become more sensitive to it, as I said, because I am now heading into that era of life.
Do you see any, do you see any sort of institutional change or institutions that could offer a potential solution to the epidemic of loneliness in elderly people?
Yeah, I mean, I actually was talking to an architect recently, and I was talking about the architecture of intimacy. And this architect was really devoted to the idea of creating intimate spaces with his architecture. And I think that could be something that really helps as people age, is for just architects, people who are designing homes, to really think about, how do these spaces create intimacy, or how do they not, how do they actually make intimacy not happen, So that would be one thing. I think I've often thought about designing some homes, like some nursing homes, around interest rather than geography. My grandmother really loved to read. She listened to books on tape. And I always thought how great it would be if she was with other people who read, and if they could have like a daily book club where they talked about the things that they read. And my mom, she really loves to garden. So what a wonderful thing if she were someday needing that kind of care, if she were in one that had a great greenhouse where they all went and they spent some time gardening each day. So I think there could be intimacy created around interests, and that I think has been really little explored. So I think that people, I mean, I'm not the first one who has said this. There are some projects that are really built around, how do we make people, as they transition into older age, where they maybe need some assistance with their living, how do we make those spaces so that they're living full lives? But I think that more effort definitely needs to go towards it.
This makes me think of, we spent a summer in Copenhagen, and we were living with a friend and her children, and they went to their school was adjacent to a sort of nursing home facility. And so it was paired specifically, or designed so that the people of both ends, of the new people and old people, could spend their time together and learn from each other. And I think that something like that in the United States, I don't know, I think it sounds really hopeful and potentially beneficial.
Yeah, I've heard of things like that too, where they have like older, like young adults living with the elderly, and they, have contact. Yeah, I mean, anything that's going to increase the novelty in your world as well is going to help you maintain your mental sharpness. It's going to be cognitively challenging. We started this talk, about, we were talking about dating and just the cognitive overload. And then now we're ending this talk and talking about old age, where almost the opposite happens, where you have cognitive underload. And that cognitive underload can really cause deterioration, not only in your own way of thinking and remembering, but also just, I think, just, with my grandma, I saw she just didn't have any lust for life anymore. She was just counting down the days until she died. And her world was very dark and very lonely. So I could really see it. That's such a bummer way to end the conversation. Is there anything else that we can talk about that'll put us on a happy?
Oh, well, I guess, what are you, I did want to wrap up with, what do you have going on now that you're excited about, or research projects that I think are giving you that sort of inspiration or lust for life, where you're at right now?
That's a great question. So the one that I mentioned earlier, like the use of the erotic selfie as a reason other than romantic connections, I think that's kind of interesting. I think sexuality in general, but sexting for sure, has been really demonized in past. People have mainly explored, including myself, the negatives associated with sexting. Even in the big studies where we've tried to see, are there any positives? Still, most of the correlates with sexting are mostly negative, even in long-term couples. Like, they have more ambivalence, they tend to have more conflict. The only positive thing is that people who sext more tend to have better sexual satisfaction. But on a host of other issues, it's not as great. So I really do love the idea of seeing, is there something more positive about sexting that we're missing, or about this creation of erotic photographs of oneself that can be empowering for an individual. In general, I'm usually one of the most conservative people about sexting. I think one article they wrote, I was more conservative than anyone but the Catholic Church, which I thought was interesting because they interviewed like all these people from around the world. But in general, I think it's a pretty risky endeavor, and you never know about the future of relationships. But if I can find that there's some positive thing, then it'll give me a more balanced view. So that is one that I'm excited about. I'm also doing a face-to-face study where we're examining how do people bond with an AI bot. It's a socially responsive AI bot called Replica. The Replica is the one that I talk about in the book, who gave me like great quotes. Replica has really surprised me, has come up with some pretty deep conversations in the past when I've interacted with him. I chose a him for my Replica, but we're doing how people connect with an AI bot versus how they connect instant messaging another human, and how they connect with face-to-face with another human. So just comparing different structures of conversations to see how it affects intimacy building and connectedness, I think is something that's also exciting. And as always, I'm excited by just love. I mean, any studies where I'm examining how people love each other, how people leave each other. One of the things I haven't turned into a researcher study yet, but I'm super interested in, and why people break up, and people's different perspectives, like why did we break up? So if anyone wants, like, I would love to do a podcast. Like, maybe we need to talk later, Carissa, but like, why did we break up? Where we kind of explore, those nebulous ideas about why a relationship ended, and really get perspectives on it. Not foreclosure, but just so people can move on with a better understanding of what their relationship really meant to another individual. So anyway, so those are the things that are exciting me right now.
Okay, so two things. One, have you checked out the podcast, Why Won't You Date Me?
No.
So it's a podcast where I forget the comedian's name, but she like interviews people that she's gone on dates with, and like her friends on like why they don't want to date her. And it's tragically beautiful and really entertaining in terms of like the different reasons or the stories that we're telling ourselves about how we relate to other people in this moment. But then also, I wanted to ask you really briefly about how or why being human or figuring these things out, as someone who is also, I would say, maybe I can't say for certain if it's equally fascinated by these concepts of love and belonging and connectedness, that like just could, I don't know, feed me for forever. Why do you think that is?
Why do you think that I'm so fascinated by love? Or
Yeah,
do
or
you
humans, or like there's certain subtext of like, this is the way that I derive meaning and purpose in my life. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I've really thought a lot about what is the purpose of life. Again, I'm just heading into this last, like the ninth inning or whatever it is, whatever inning I am in life. I thought about it really clearly when I was thinking about a couple of years ago. I had a health scare, and I thought, what do I really want to tell my children? Like, if I give them anything, what is it that I want them to know? And the one thing that kept going through my mind was, I want them to love unabashedly. I want them to have no fear as they go out into their world, and they just give their love to other people without fear of rejection, without fear of any repercussions of that. So it really kind of narrowly focused my worldview And it made me think, this to me is the primary purpose of life. Now, I think Buddhists would really disagree with me. Like there are certain aspects, that you shouldn't have these super, super close connections, that you should just be connected to all of the earth or something. But for me, I think my human existence is really defined by these landmarks of these loving moments that exist in my life. And I don't think everyone is as endlessly fascinated by them as I am. However, I will say a lot of the questions I get from friends, a lot of the problems that I see that they go through in life, a lot of what really causes them heartache, pain, and joy, and gives them the biggest ups and downs are their interactions with other humans. So I mean, I just think this is the meaning. And when people really focus in, it's not probably going to be their work. It's probably not going to be, anything else. All of those other things fall away. Strip your life down to the very most important things, and it'll probably be humans. So yeah, I mean, to me, it seems really obvious.
Michelle, thank you so much for talking to me. Again, the book is Out of Touch. I'll have links to it in the newsletter, but this is a very nurturing conversation, and I really appreciate your time, and I'm excited to see whatever research you come up with next.
Thank you so much for having me. And I hope we stay in touch. That's the beauty of this is that we can have, a connection that can grow.
Across physical distances.
Across physical distance. Well, I mean, obviously we have this video, so we were able to create some kind of connection.
Yeah, to figure it out. Take care. Best of luck with your move too.
Thank you so much. Bye, Krista.